Hey everyone! Today we're learning about optional chaining in JavaScript, a powerful feature that helps you safely access deeply nested properties. By the end of this tutorial, you'll understand how to use optional chaining to avoid those pesky, cannot read property of undefined errors, and you'll see practical examples of how this works in real-world code. So what's the problem we're solving here? When you try to access deeply nested properties in JavaScript, if any intermediate property is undefined or null, you get an error. For example, if you try to access user.address.street but user is undefined, JavaScript throws an error. This means you have to manually check each level before accessing the final property, which leads to verbose and error-prone code. Optional chaining is a syntax that allows you to safely access deeply nested properties. It stops evaluating the expression if any intermediate property is null or undefined, and instead returns undefined. This was introduced in ES 2020 and has become a standard way to handle potentially missing data in JavaScript applications. How does optional chaining work? It uses the question mark followed by a dot. This operator checks each level of the property chain before proceeding. If any property in the chain is null or undefined, the expression stops evaluating and returns undefined. This makes your code much cleaner and more readable compared to manual null checks. Let's look at the basic syntax. Here we have a user object with name and address properties. Here's a practical example. We have a user object that only has a name property. If we try to access user.address.street without optional chaining, we get a type error. But with optional chaining, the expression safely returns undefined instead of throwing an error. This is exactly what makes optional chaining so powerful. Optional chaining isn't just for property access, it also works with function calls. Here we have a user object with a getAddress method. Using optional chaining, we can safely call this method and access its properties. If any part of the chain is undefined, the entire expression returns undefined without throwing errors. You can combine optional chaining with the nullish coalescing operator to provide default values. Here we're trying to access a potentially missing street property, and if it's undefined, we provide a default value of unknown. This gives you complete control over how to handle missing data. Let's look at a practical example. Imagine you're working with an API response that might have nested data. Using optional chaining, you can safely access properties like user.profile.age without worrying about whether any intermediate property exists. If the data is missing, you'll get undefined instead of an error. Another common use case is form data validation. When working with form data, you might have nested field structures. Optional chaining lets you safely access field values without having to check if each parent object exists first. This makes your form handling code much cleaner and more maintainable. Let's compare optional chaining to manual null checks. On the left, you can see the verbose approach of checking each level before accessing the final property. On the right, we have the clean and concise optional chaining syntax. The optional chaining approach is not only shorter but also more readable and less error-prone. There's an important distinction between optional chaining and the optional operator. Optional chaining uses the operator between each property access, while the optional operator only uses it before the final property. The optional chaining approach is more comprehensive and recommended for most use cases. One common mistake is overusing optional chaining. Here we're trying to call toUpperCase directly on the result of optional chaining. While this works, it can make your code harder to understand. A better approach is to first store the result in a variable and then perform operations on it if it exists. Another common mistake is forgetting to provide default values. When using optional chaining, you might get undefined for missing properties. To provide a better user experience, always include default values using the nullish coalescing operator. This ensures your application always displays something meaningful to users. Here's a pro tip. For the most robust data handling, always combine optional chaining with the nullish coalescing operator. This gives you complete control over how to handle missing data, whether you want to show default values or perform special handling for undefined cases. If you're working with TypeScript, consider using it with optional chaining. TypeScript provides better type safety, which can help catch potential issues with optional property access before they become runtime errors. This makes your code even more robust and maintainable. Here's another tip. Optional chaining isn't just for objects, it also works with arrays. You can safely access array elements using optional chaining, which is particularly useful when working with data that might have missing or incomplete array elements. That's it for today's tutorial. You've learned how to use optional chaining to safely access deeply nested properties in JavaScript. This powerful feature helps you write cleaner, more robust code and avoid those pesky undefined errors. If you found this helpful, please like the video and subscribe for more JavaScript tutorials. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.